Hello and welcome, Fadi Hashem and Dr. Ili Abaoun and anybody that's watching. Thanks for joining us today for a closer look. We want to discuss the Arab human rights system. Fadi Hashem has written a paper for us that I hope you've read or we would like to introduce to you. And allow me to introduce our two guests before we start. Fadi Hashem is a human rights lawyer. He's a researcher, he's a lecturer and consultant specializing in gender and cultural rights. Currently, he's pursuing his PhD at the Beirut Arab University in international law and human rights, which is why he's an expert in the field. He wrote the paper for us. Thank you for being with us, Fadi, and for taking the time. Dr. Ili Abaoun is also with us and has worked in the human rights sector for, well over 20 years now. You're a visiting lecturer at the St. Joseph University, also in Beirut, and currently a senior advisor for MENA Affairs at Strategy International. But you're also well known for being a TV commentator, analyst, consultant, lecturer. There's a lot of things we can read that you've written. Thank you for joining us today at this session as well.
Thank you for having me.
Fadi, let me just quite plainly at the beginning start by asking you, what was the motivation to come to us as the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Rule of Law Program, Middle East and North Africa, and say, look, I think it's important we write a paper on the Arab human rights system. What was the motivation behind that?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you for the introduction. I think there are many motivations behind wanting to work on a topic, on a paper with such a topic. I think one of the most important ones would be the current situation in the Arab world. The current situation, the ongoing crisis, including the wars, the conflicts, the everything that is happening in terms of human rights violations and affecting the daily life of people. But also an important consideration is that after working for a considerable amount of time in the legal field in the Arab world, this system is very much unknown and people are not familiar, even lawyers are not familiar with the existence of the system. It's not taught at the universities. At most universities, I would say, students are not familiar with that such a system exists, and even practicing lawyers are not familiar that such system exists. And I think Konrad Adenauer is a good platform to raise these issues because of the work they do in terms of awareness on rule of law in the MENA region, having a dedicated program for it that is based in Lebanon, and especially with all the work they do with judges and lawyers. So I think this paper aims to, as a first look, it aims to contribute to the improvement of the human rights governance in the Arab world and raise the issues that we have a system that is existing, and it has a very big importance as a system, and which we will talk about during this meeting.
Dr. Ili, would you agree? In your experience, is it the case that it is not as familiar as it should be? That there is an Arab human rights charter. And there is an Arab human rights system in place.
I definitely agree that that this topic is important. Yes, there is a charter and the human rights system in place, but as both of you mentioned, it's widely unrecognized, unknown. It's hidden somehow, and it's not enacted in many cases and countries. It's not being implemented or referred to. So it's kind of something that was put in the archive. That people tend to forget about, including practitioners, as Fadi rightly mentioned. But it's always relevant to bring it back to the forefront and see how human rights activists and organizations can actually use at least parts of it. Not all of it may be accessible or useful, but some parts may be useful.
Something, Fadi, that you lay out in your paper is that, of course, we have the Arab Human Rights Charter, but we also have a lot of international human rights treaties that the Arab countries have ratified. Can you share with us a little bit about the history of the Arab Charter on Human Rights, and also share with us they might have ratified it, but can you share with us a little bit more about how they have been implemented or enforced, something that you also cover in your paper?
I think what people don't know, and what most people, I was surprised to learn of myself, is that the regional system, the regional organization, intergovernmental organization of the Arab states, which is the League of Arab States, is one of the oldest. It's older than the European one. It was established in 1945 which is surprising considering that it was the one that was most late to have a human rights system and still does not have a functioning one. But the League of Arab States was established in 1945 compared to the Council of Europe that was established in 1949, and compared to the African system of human rights, an African regional organization that was established way later. And also, as a fun fact, if you may, the consultants and the experts of the Arab League of Arab States have helped develop the African system before even developing their own. So yeah, as a brief history. So the topic of human rights, even though the system is quite old, the topic of human rights came really late. In its early life, the League of Arab States had focused a lot on cooperation between states, on economic cooperation, on political cooperation, but the topic of human rights wasn't addressed for a very long time. And it wasn't addressed until 1994, and a couple of years earlier, where we had the first attempt at having a charter on human rights. But that 1994 draft was discredited, and it wasn't. It was failed because it wasn't ratified. But it took 10 years later, and the participation of civil society and experts, to have an Arab Charter on human rights later on in 2004, which was later ratified and came into effect in 2008, and still not ratified by all countries, by the way, of the Arab states, of all Arab states. So I think that tells us something. That tells us that even though the system is old, awareness about the importance of human rights issue, and more importantly, awareness that we have to work together as Arab countries on the issue of human rights has came very late compared to other systems worldwide. And which is still the case, because even though we have the charter in 2004, we will see, and it's clear in the paper, that the system is not functioning. The system is not there yet. And that is for many reasons. One of them is one that you mentioned, Philip. One of them is the one that we talked about in the paper, is that somehow Arab countries still have some kind of resentment, if I can call it this way, some kind of resentment against international mechanisms of human rights for many reasons, and which is a topic that we talk about in literature today, which is decolonializing human rights and the whole contextualization of human rights in the Arab world. Because somehow countries of the Arab world have still not ratified all treaties, and the ones they did, they have made a lot of reservations on, and that we'll talk about in I won't go long on this, we'll talk about it next.
Dr. Ely, I want to pick up on the word resentment that Fadi just mentioned. I mean, in your experience all over kind of the region, I mean, we met in Beirut, last I saw you in Tunis, now you're in Cairo. Would you agree, is there a resentment there, or is it, I mean, of course, less a feeling? I'm sure there are political motivations there as well. What's your insight on this?
Well, in general, all governments don't like human rights instruments. It's not only the governments in the region, but I do agree, and I can see, firsthand, that the governments in the region are definitely much more hostile to all of this mindset than any other government in the world, especially in the countries that are categorized as democracies or quasi-democracies. But anyway, so I think this is a problem with the regimes, but essentially, but I see also another cultural and social dimension to this, because in some countries we've seen, revolutions and coup d'etat and others. So we've seen opposition groups actually taking power, but still their stand on human rights didn't change. So this indicates that it was not a problem with only one type of regimes or one type of monarchy or president or dictator. It's a broader social issue, and we know it, from our daily life in Lebanon, from our, sometimes friends and family members, is that the whole concept of human rights is not something really part of our social norms. And what's happening now around us is actually pushing everyone away from the human rights values and mindset, than getting us closer to that. Of course, many observers are trying to link this kind of decline of human rights agenda to what's happening in Gaza. But for people who worked in this field for a long time, like me, I can definitely see that the decline started long before the Gaza war. We've seen a gradual erosion of these values and these principles over the last 20 or 25 years at all levels. And the Gaza war is just a manifestation of this same disease, if you wish to call it. It's one of the symptoms actually of the disease, but it's not the first symptom.
I would actually like to ask a question, Dr. Ely, about one specific country, because I was thinking as you were saying this very much about Tunisia. Now, after the Arab uprising, or the Arab Spring, more famously, what it's known for, would you say there were improvements there? Did we see something that got better and has now diminished again? Or was there no real impact, no real positive impact in the long run so far?
No, I mean, I have a personal theory about what happened in 2011, not only in Tunisia, but in the entire region, is that it was not a politically driven political movement. It was not a politically driven movement, popular movement. It was essentially a movement that was trying to get better living standards and better socioeconomic conditions. But the main driving force was not freedom and democracy and the political pluralism and multi-party system. That was not on the mind of many people who went on the streets. And this is why one of the mistakes of the international community is that the first thing they did in 2012, 2013 is that they pushed for multi-party elections in most of the countries, but they ignored the fact that the economic systems of these countries were deeply flawed and required structural reforms, without which we cannot reach the level of improving living standards, and therefore the whole political dividends of that movement will be taken away. And this is exactly what happened: is that we rushed into elections. And we deployed all the international election big organizations, training candidates, doing media campaigns, etc. But in the meanwhile, all the economic issues that caused the popular movement 2011 to emerge actually were still there. And so people in Egypt, in Tunisia, and in other places as well became disappointed with this multi-party system and said, okay, this is not what we wanted. We wanted better living conditions, better economic. So they reverted back to the older model, which said, okay, let's have one central authority, even if this authority is somehow unfair, undemocratic, trying to marginalize opponents, but at least we will have one reference trying to deal with corruption, with economic decisions, etc. So this is exactly what happened in the last few years in Tunisia, in Egypt, other places. And it was never, as I said, a politically driven popular movement.
I mean, I very much agree that economic prosperity, has to go hand in hand. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Fadi, let me get back to the reservations that you mentioned at the end of what you said last. So a lot of these international treaties, and maybe you can name a few to introduce us to them, have been ratified by many of the Arab countries. However, with certain reservations. Can you you go on about this in the paper, and it's very enlightening. Can you share with us, what these reservations are and how come we have them?
Yes. So there is so as you said, there are 9 core international human rights treaties. There are debates like 7, 8, 9, 10, but that's in the paper we go with the 9 core human rights treaties. And these international human rights treaties are majority ratified in the region, minus the one on rights on migrant workers that is only ratified by 4 to 5 countries in the region. But it's the one that is the least ratified. But all the others are widely ratified in the region. But that doesn't actually mean a lot, because even though they are ratified, some provisions that are very much known, and I will talk about that in a few. Some provisions have accumulated a high number of reservations from countries. Looking closer at these reservations, and as presented in the paper, these reservations are based and justified by religion. And these reservations, so in the paper, it is mentioned that counting the reservations that were done, which is a work that was done for under this research, we have a total of 231 reservations made by Arab countries in the region. From these 31 reservations, 212 of them are justified by religion, which is a huge number, leaving only a few of them that are not justified by religion. And there is a reason for that. There is a reason for that that is also very clear, is that if we look closer at what are these provisions that have collected that large amount of reservations, they are the provisions that directly target the private life of every individual, that target the private, you wouldn't see a reservation on economic rights. You wouldn't see a reservation on the right to have education, but you would definitely see a reservation on women's rights. You would see reservations on child rights to choose their religion. You would see reservations on freedom of religion and freedom of expression, because there are other rights and other things that interact with these provisions in Sharia law and in Islamic law that governs in the region. So the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights is widely reserved against. CEDAW is widely reserved against. The Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination is widely reserved against. The Child Rights Convention is widely reserved against, because these types of and these treaties do target a certain aspect of life of individuals that is believed to have been westernized by the countries that have established the international standards for human rights. There is a certain vision in the region, and not only in the region here, in many regions in the world, but the global south, that international standards of human rights have been put forward by Western countries, and that at large these standards are Christian based and are progressive based and do not actually represent the majority of the opinions worldwide, namely the opinions of Islamic studies and Islamic interpretations to these private aspects of a person's life. So when it comes to marriage, when it comes to the right of women, when it comes to the right of children, when it comes to freedom of expression, do I really have the right to say whatever I want? But what about when I'm being blasphemous? So something that is not mentioned in the paper, but hopefully would come in other papers that I'm working on at the moment, is that the reason why freedom of expression is so limited, one of the reasons why freedom of expression is so limited in the Middle East, is that all of the Arab countries in the region have blasphemy laws. And as recognized by the General Comment 34 of the ICCPR, blasphemy is not a reason to limit freedom of expression. But the countries in the region do not agree with that. And they do agree that blasphemy should be a reason to limit freedom of expression. And no one, no matter how much they have, how freedom of expression, how much freedom of expression is allowed, saying anything that it criticizes or is blasphemous against certain religious figures and symbols is prohibited. So that is one very, very important example to mention.
I mean, there's a lot of points that I could go into. I want to pick two. So I think if we look at the history of human rights, it's difficult to argue that a lot of the ideas didn't come from the West. I mean, I think a lot of the ideas did indeed come from the West. But Dr. Ely, if we take the Arab Human Rights Charter, it's an Arab document, right? So the people that wrote it, that decided about it, are Arabs that could, make it theirs and are basically saying these are our rights as well. These are international values. So that's sort of an argument I want to put on the table against that cultural thought. And a second question I want to ask is, when we have different freedoms or rights that collide, and let's say we have the freedom of religion on the one side and we have equality, but I think that's a bad example because there I would always value sort of equality over it. But certain freedoms can collide and then you have to decide, you have to balance them. And what about just considering the Arab culture valuing freedom of religion just somewhat higher than, for example, we would perhaps in Germany? Is that something that can make it more understandable, the way that the Arab human rights system is and the things that Fadi has just laid out?
So I beg to differ on the first one. I don't think that the values of human rights are Western values. And I have a solid case on this, and this is a case that I teach at university, is that the essential value on which the whole human rights discourse or system rests is the human dignity. Human dignity means practically that the human being was always distinguished among all other creatures. And this is why this special creature has special rights, right? This is where it comes from essentially. And this specific value is universal. And there is a reason why these are called universal values, because the value of dignity, you can find it in literally every single religion all around the world, in every single non-religious civilization all around the world. Now, if you even look at the holy books of the religions that emerged in the region, in the MENA here, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. None of these religions are Western. All of them are, Middle Eastern, basically. And the three holy books include references to some of the values about the value of life, the value of liberty. Now, the practice of religion later on was not in line with the values itself. But if you look at the text itself, there are a lot of values in the text that are clearly stated in the holy books. So I always challenge this premise that the human rights values are a Western construct, or specifically Judeo-Christian.
That's why I challenged you. That's of course why I challenged you.
And Judeo-Christian is not Europe, is not Western. This is what people confuse or conflate. Judeo-Christian means Middle Eastern, essentially, because these two religions started in the Middle East. They didn't start in Europe. Now, what happened is that, in the last 200 years, we've seen more manifestations in terms of, bills of rights, declarations, statements, etc., happening in the West. But that is related to the political liberalism that happened in these countries, which allowed this discourse to emerge. But it's not about the values being Western. And what happened in 1948 is that they just put these values in the framework of an international legal instrument. They
with
didn't
the Lebanese.
anything.
I mean, with the Lebanese, by the way.
Yes, with the contribution of one very famous Lebanese philosopher and jurist. And they didn't invent anything new. And the preamble of the declaration states that we are just recognizing all of these values. They didn't say we're instating new rights or establishing new rights. So the values of human rights are universal, and this is something that can, as I said, can be easily demonstrated. And the question now is why people in the region don't really identify with these values. And here comes, I think, part of the responsibility falls on the religious establishment, not the religions themselves, but the religious establishments tried to protect their own control over, their own communities by separating or by trying to shield these communities from embracing these values of human rights. And the political context in the region, from the Ottoman Empire, occupation of many countries, to the colonialism later on, etc., didn't help at all with, liberating these communities from the grasp of the religious community. So, and this is this is by itself, this might require a separate discussion because this is a long thing to discuss. But in a nutshell, this is why I think, or this is at least one of the reasons why people didn't really embrace these values in the region.
Now, of course, if we have a Arab human rights system or any human rights system, we need, of course, a court to enforce it. We need, the rules, the regulations, the freedoms to be implemented and to be controlled. Now, there is a statute of an Arab human rights court, and there's meant to be one in Bahrain. Fadi, can you kind of share with us a little bit more about why it's not so commonly known, or I mean, and that's the case, why it's not functioning yet?
I will discuss the first point, and I will leave the second point to Dr. Abouan to discuss, because it's more political than legal, the issue of establishment. But actually, the system does need a court. It could be not, honestly. It could be not. It could be not needing of a court, but it for sure needs.
But that's a perfect world, I would think.
Yeah. But again, then the scenario would be having a court, and having a court that is not functional, or having a court that would issue decisions that wouldn't function anywhere, that would make the situation worse. So sometimes maybe as a theory, not having a court is sometimes maybe morally better than having a court. So if we want to have a court, we need to have a court that has powers. We need to have a court that can enforce decision. And if we can't do that, it's better not to have a court. However, what we need now, and I think in my opinion is very much needed, is the capacity of the committee to be able to elaborate on these rights. So we have the charter, we have the vision, but we always talk about what does this mean for us? But we haven't done much work trying to elaborate and provide comments and visions of what these rights mean for the region. There are many reasons for that, and I'm sure Dr. Abouan is going to elaborate further on that. There are many reasons is because, are we unified as a region? Do we have the same identity? And what is even the Arab identity? And there is still struggle around that, and we've discussed that a lot with Dr. Abouan in the past. There is still struggle about what does it mean to be Arab? Is it the language? Is it the religion? Because not both of those are not common in the whole region. So there is still a non-consensus on these, but not to go longer, but that's also because that's also a different topic that would require a session of its own. But I think what we need now before the court is giving some kind of power to the committee to be able to explain and to be able to provide comments and elaborate more on, okay, the Arab countries have been saying for so long that these rights do not represent us and these are very westernized concepts. Okay, translate them into words that would reflect what you really think. Translate them into words that, into comments, into issue decisions, issue opinions, advisory opinions maybe, on what do you think that these provisions and standards would mean to you. And maybe we can go from there and decide then each country if they fit into this system or not before proceeding to doing anything else.
I mean, without a court, there's no chance in the enforcement. So I would argue against that. But let me give the word or the floor to Dr. Ely. What's your opinion on this?
My opinion is that it's somehow similar to what Fadi said. I don't think that the presence of the court by itself will be a game changer, because in any legal system, before going to a regional court, you need to use all the domestic mechanisms. And we know that how our judiciary are functioning in the region. They're not independent, they're politicized, they're corrupt, they're etc. So if you don't have a proper functioning and independent, impartial judiciary in your own country, having a court in Bahrain is not going to be a game changer. And moreover, if there is no popular buy-in to these values, then also the court will be acting in disconnect with the reality on the ground. So there's a lot of work to be done before we see the value of having a court. There's work to be done at the social level, cultural level, but also at the judicial level at each of the countries, and then we can move one level up with the regional court. So yeah, I see it as premature, or
But so as a final question to both of you, you mentioned there's a lot of work to be done, but let me scrutinize you on that. What work exactly? I mean, if we look at the countries in the region, where should we start? What's your outlook? Let me call it, for the Arab human rights system. Organizations such as ours, for example, but also other NGOs, what What can we do?
Dr. Abon, do you want to start or do you want to
No,
conclude?
go ahead.
Okay, so I think the first thing that to be done is that, and allow me to clarify on my behalf and on behalf of Dr. Abon, we're both not neglecting the importance of a court. We're just saying it's a bit premature at the moment. So indeed, if there was to be a functional system, a court is needed, but that wouldn't be the first step. That wouldn't be the first thing that would be done to make the system functional. If so, if we established a court now, I think that would bring the system backwards instead of bringing it any forward, because we're going to be establishing a new entity that is not functional, making the system much more not functional than it already is. I think what should be done by organizations is launch the discussion again, because this discussion has been dead for a long time. And people are forgetting that there is a system that is running. It has employees, it has funding, it is based somewhere, but it's not very active. And most importantly, why I think it is, in my opinion, is that this is the League of Arab States was established in 1945. The Arab world doesn't look anymore. The power dynamics in the Arab world now in 2024 are not the same as they were in 1945. And these also should be taken into consideration in terms of who is going to lead on this, because someone needs to lead on this. The court needs to be established somewhere. Someone needs to initiate this. And who is the best actor to initiate this? That is a very important question to answer before doing anything. Because if who has the capacity and the authority and the political power and the economic power to enforce such a system in the League of Arab States? Who will be the country to bring back the topic of human rights on the League of Arab States table, especially now, everything that is happening in Palestine? Who has such power to do that? And that is a big question to answer. And I think the most important thing that should be done by Konrad Adenauer and by organizations working with the system is that put back this discussion on the table.
Well, there are a lot of things to be done. I don't think in a few minutes we'll be able to go through, but I would like to emphasize two main things. The first one is we need to convince people that their interests and their values and their whatever their ideas, their culture will be protected by a human rights system rather than being attacked by a human rights system or being endangered by a human rights system. Because now the concept or the construct in the mind of people is that if we go in this way, then we're going to lose our culture, our identity, our values, our etc. And therefore, our defense mechanism is to go to our own, tribe, community, religious, whatever. So we need to have some proof of concept that no, your culture, your identity can actually be protected with a human rights system. And this is obviously something that takes a lot of time. I'm not saying this is something that can be done in 1 or 2 years. The second thing is that you can't do this work with foreign funding. As long as it is being done with foreign funding, it will always be questioned as not being genuine. So what we need to do in parallel is to cultivate more indigenous philanthropy. We need more philanthropy not philanthropy for charity, because we have a lot of people giving money for charity. And of course, this is good. I'm not saying this is bad, but this is not enough. We need more philanthropy for human rights and social justice initiatives, so that we work on social change initiatives at the grassroots level with local money. And this is how you remove a lot of suspicion about, what's the agenda, what's behind this, who's behind it, etc., etc. So these are two important things. Of course, there are a lot of other things. I'm not saying these are the two things, but with the time left, I don't think we have, I can go further than this.
No, but I think those are two very valuable and important aspects. I agree that, when I look at our work, I think to raise awareness, and this is something you both mentioned, is of course something that we can do and should do, and I think it's important to raise awareness on this issue, on the Arab human rights system. Fadi, thank you for your paper. Dr. Ili Abou, thank you for coming in and taking the time. I hope many people read it. I hope everyone that's watching has found these 30 minutes interesting. I hope to see both of you again soon. Any last words if you have any, but I just want to say thank you.
Thank you very much. Just one last thought. I think, what I said before goes beyond awareness raising. Sorry, it's about a proof of concept. It's not our people. In some cases, people know that what they're doing is wrong. It's just that there are, stronger factors pushing them to act in a certain way. So we need to reverse this.
I mean, so raising awareness is sort of the minimum.
Yes, yeah, but it has to go beyond that. But again, thank you for having me, and Fadi, thank you for the paper. It's very informative and timely. Thank you.
Yeah, as a final thought for me, I think there needs to be people, as Eli Abawan said from the very first beginning of this meeting, people in the world have lost faith in human rights with everything that is happening now, the many conflict happening in Ukraine, in the region, everywhere around the world. People have lost faith in the power of international human rights law. And I think a lot of work has to be done in bringing back faith of people in human rights and in any system, not just the Arab one. Thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both.